Joe Hill was shot by firing squad in Salt Lake City in 1915. His anniversary is November the 19th, which, as it happens, is also International Men's Day, and a perfect opportunity to recall his death and the words for which he is most remembered. Don't mourn for me, organise. He was born Joel Emanuel Haglund in the early 1880s in Gave, Sweden, on the Baltic coast. Hill, on left of picture, grew up in poverty in a family of 6 children. His father died from an accident when Hill was 8, and Joel became a child labourer. In the house in which he grew up, there is now a small museum in his memory. As a child, he learned the piano, guitar, accordion, and violin, and developed a talent for writing songs. At age 22, with both parents now deceased, the children divided their little means and dispersed. Joel used his share to emigrate to the US with his brother Paul on the Saxonas liner, and eventually he took the name Joe Hillstrom, or Hill for short. He lost contact with Paul. Hill was a migrant labourer working in New York, Cleveland, Chicago, Portland, Spokane, San Francisco, from where he wrote to the Galway newspaper about the earthquake, and in San Diego and San Pedro. It is also claimed he spent some time in Mexico and Hawaii. In 1910, he joined the radical trade union, the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, which organised unskilled manual workers. It used militant actions, strikes, and large-scale protests, and early members included both James Connolly, who was executed in Dublin exactly 6 months after Hill died, and Jim Larkin, who spoke at Hill's funeral. Hill penned labour songs and published over a dozen in the Little Red Songbook. The song The Preacher and the Slave, which produced the phrase Pie in the Sky, was sung to compete with Salvation Army street singing.
You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky, way up high, work and pray, live on hay.
Blacklisted in California, Hill went to work in Salt Lake City, where he lodged with the Aselius family with his friend Otto Appelquist. In January 1914, Hill was arrested as the prime suspect for the murders of shopkeeper and former policeman John Morrison and his son, who were both shot dead as they closed Morrison's store in Salt Lake City. And later, the evening of the murder, Hill was treated by a doctor for a gunshot wound. Hill claimed his wound was the result of being shot by a man in an argument over a woman, but he never revealed the identity of either the assailant or the woman. Once arrested, and after it became known he was an activist with the IWW, which had several serious clashes with the Utah authorities arising from strikes at nearby Bingham Canyon and Tucker copper mines, his case proceeded inexorably towards conviction.
There's a long, long line of people trying to keep from crying. There's always someone dying, but today's just not the same.
Although there was no identification, no trace of blood, only flimsy evidence that a raider had been shot and no evidence he had any previous connection or motivation with regard to the victim, the jury found Hill guilty of murder and he was sentenced to death by Judge Morris Ritchie, who gave him the choice of death by hanging or by shooting. "I'll take shooting," he replied. "I'm used to that. I've been shot a few times in the past and I guess I can stand it again." An international campaign was launched by the IWW to put pressure on Governor Spry to postpone the execution. It attracted an array of impressive supporters, including many members of the Swedish community, the civil rights campaigner Helen Keller, and President Woodrow Wilson, who sent a telegram to Spry requesting he postpone the execution. As he awaited execution, Hill corresponded with Elizabeth Flynn, a second-generation Irish feminist leader who played a leading role in the successful Bread and Roses textile strike in Lawrence in 1914. They became friends. He wrote a song about her, The Rebel Girl, and described her as an inspiration. The song drew attention to the need for a greater feminist involvement in the male-dominated labour movement.
Proud to fight for freedom with the rebel.
Goodbye, Bill, he wrote to Bill Haywood, the president of the IWW. I die like a true blue rebel. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organise. The night before he was executed, he wrote a last will that was given to friends. My body, if I could choose, I would to ashes it reduce, and let the merry breezes blow my dust to where some flowers grow, perhaps some fading flower then would come to life and bloom again. After execution, his body was taken beyond the state border so that it would not be buried in Utah. It was estimated that 30,000 people attended his Chicago funeral. Bill Haywood and Ireland's Labour leader James Larkin made speeches. His ashes were put into small envelopes, and on May Day 1916 they were scattered in every state of the Union. Since his death, commentators agree that he did not get a fair trial. Labour supporters argued the charges were trumped up, while others suggest that he participated in Morrison's killing and subsequently saw the opportunity to use the case as a rallying call for Labour. Certainly, at the time, the IWW had less than 20,000 members. As a militant movement, it was despised by the authorities and mainstream media. It relied greatly on martyrdom and publicity in building its support. William Adler's 2011 biography provides an important addition to the Joe Hill story. Adler located a letter from Hilda Eriksson, a niece of the Aselius family where Hill had lodged, and seen here wearing the polka dot scarf on a family outing with friends. In her letter, written in 1949 to an academic conducting a study on Hill that was never published, Eriksson confirmed that she was Hill's secret lover, that on the fateful night in Salt Lake City, Hill had rowed with and been shot by his friend and fellow lodger, Otto Appelquist, to whom she was previously engaged. Hilda's story provides an important missing link as to why Joe Hill did not provide an alibi in his defence, and helps to explain the motivation for his silence: to hide his romantic relationship with Hilda and to protect her reputation. It is of course likely that Hill, as a songwriter, understood the symbolism that would evoke from his execution. He lost his life, but his legacy and the movement he loved and wrote and sang for lived on. The song "I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill" is a fitting tribute to his memory, and is covered by many fine artists, including Pete Seeger, Joan Baez and Luke Kelly. American Labour singer Ann Feeney is seen here singing it at Joe Hill's museum in Gravle, Sweden. It was also covered by the wonderful Paul Robeson. Robeson himself was a Labour activist and internationalist, and in his own life struggled against prejudice and discrimination.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers fight and organize, it's there you'll find Joe Hill. It's there you'll find Joe Hill. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never